very verbose, very wordy, but it's a nice way of just packaging up the idea of, okay, why do we worship or why do we honor the gods? You know, some people I've seen will do a sort of invocation of the three realms, and that's totally fine. In countries that remain Catholic, we have this amazing survival of so much pagan practice and folklore, and just the thinnest of veneers of Christianity. And when it comes to the Irish rites themselves, we don't have those direct survivals. But we do from a lot of neighboring cultures, especially, for example, the Roman paganism, default human spirituality. So what do you need? Just yourself.
Hello and welcome to the Pagan Portal Podcast, produced by Moonbooks Publishing and presented by me, Rachel Patterson. We have a fascinating guest today, but we did have a few technical issues. Definitely gremlins in the work today, so do bear with us. There's still lots of fascinating information to watch and to listen to. And watch as I magically change outfit in a matter of seconds. With me today, I have the talented linguistic and author, John McLoughlin. Welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, pleasure to be here and talking with you.
So let's start off with the straightforward stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, so I am born and raised in Duluth, Minnesota, which is in the upper Midwest United States. It's just about a 2-hour drive from the Canadian border, right on the tip of Lake Superior. It's mostly known for being a really cold place that, has a super long, harsh winter, but gorgeous summers. I love it. It's a very natural area. You know, you walk and or drive just 10 minutes in any direction and you're in the middle of forest. It's gorgeous that way and has always been very inspiring to me. So yeah, I grew up there, and I grew up in kind of a very lax family religious wise. You know, I never had really religion forced upon me. So for me, it was always a curiosity. It was sort of a interesting thing to delve into, and a curious topic, if anything. And so I can get into that maybe a little bit later. That's getting into the nitty gritty right there. But so just a Midwest guy, but I come from a background of a family that's very in touch with its Irish heritage and roots, and that was always a great inspiration for me, and what ultimately led me to studying the material for this book and bringing it to fruition now.
It sounds idyllic. Beautiful. Love being in nature, obviously. So for your spiritual pathway, and this question's quite difficult sometimes, how would you describe your spiritual pathway?
It's a mess. It's
all the best ones are.
Right? If it's not messy, I don't think you're doing it right. Like, I have been all over the place, but that's because I'm definitely a seeker type of personality. One of my very dear aunts has told me before how one of her most prominent memories of me when I was growing up is I was the little boy who just kept saying why all the time. Well, why do I do that? Well, why are we doing that? Why is it that way? You know, which super annoying when you're little, but you know, maybe
yes.
it's right. I'm sure I was a nightmare, but you know, so I always had that curiosity about the world, and I think, as far as the spiritual path itself, it kind of got triggered when I was super little. I was only about 6 or so when my grandma passed away, and I was super close with her. I used to be with her all the time, and I just think of that as maybe the initial kind of springboard for my spiritual path, because there's even like home videos of me back then wondering, you know, I wonder what happened with grandma, you know, and, you know, is she in heaven or is she in hell? What is going on here? And I didn't really, you know, like I was kind of starting to say, the religious framework I grew up in was fairly loose. Like, I'd been baptized because my mom comes from a Catholic background. So she wanted that done, but then like we never really went to church after that. And then for my dad, he was a little bit more influenced by his own background as a Methodist, and his sister more so. She was getting into church, I guess, at the time when I was little, and she was like, that boy needs some church in his life. Come on, bring him in. And so my dad would bring me to his Methodist church, and which is, again, one of the most lax, easygoing of the denominations out there, at least the way it's expressed in the United States. And so we would go, and basically it was singing some hymns. I would go off to Sunday school. Sometimes we would play with the kids. I'd learn some of the, very nice, easygoing Bible verses. But there was, again, never really any pressure in my family. Like, if I wanted to sleep in on a Sunday, my dad'd be like, all right, we'll just get lunch later, whatever, so.
Sounds like your plan.
In retrospect, that was like a beautiful way to do it. I'm glad I didn't have to grow up with some of the pressure that some people feel in a religious background. And in some ways that has shaped my approach even to Christianity, which maybe we'll get into a little bit later. But anyway, so that was kind of the initial tipping point that got my already hyper inquisitive mind going about, okay, what's going on behind the veil here in the world? What's this whole spiritual world thing? The first place it led me to was actually Judaism. When I was about, not usually the first place.
I was not expecting that, I must admit.
Right?
No, that was fascinating, actually. I really wasn't expecting you to say Judaism, that's for sure. What led you... Now, your book is about Irish pagan rites. So what led you to the Irish side of things?
Indeed. So I was getting all into Judaism, fascinating religion. However, it's something that really became super apparent to me. And this is a beautiful aspect of Judaism within those who kind of are raised in it, but is that family connection that a lot of people of Jewish background have, and even like the rabbis and Jewish sages themselves will kind of say, it's not so much about, the practice itself or showing up in shul or synagogue on Friday and Saturday. It's about passing on the traditions. It's about observing the mitzvot. I mean, you can do all of the prayers necessary in Judaism just in your own home. You don't necessarily even have to grace the doors of a synagogue. And so there's this just strong family connectedness there. And when you don't have that, it's so hard not to just always feel like you're permanently on the outside looking in. So
right, yeah.
So I was going to say inquisitor in me, but that was kind of rough connotations. The questioner, there we go, in me was like, okay, well, that's really not, if that's not my family, that's not my roots, where is my family story? Where are my family roots, my ancestral connection? And that led me rather obviously to Irish roots. My family has always been very big about their Irish roots and ancestry, sometimes in the exact way that is so annoying to actual Irish people living in Ireland, where it's like, okay, you're not actually Irish, you are, which is true and fair. I totally own it. It's good. We're good. I'm not one of those. I swear.
There's some Irish DNA there, though. That's
exactly. I have the ancestry results to prove it. So, but as part of that too, there's an Irish diaspora culture all of its own that is just full of this longing. I think there was this experience in the Irish diaspora because so many people who emigrated to Ireland didn't really do so willingly. They did it because they thought there was no other
Right.
hope for their future, or because of, the great hunger or the purgings going on or the warfare. And so throughout the story, Irish diaspora is this constant sort of longing look back over the ocean for maybe someday we can get back there, to, this idealized, almost heaven on earth kind of vision that Ireland started to take up in the diaspora mythos. And my family is no different in that.
Yeah.
In that I was kind of raised with that same sort of for Ireland, all the Irish, as my great-grandfather and him, family, etc. So as I was kind of thinking about, okay, what is then the spirituality of the Irish people? Obviously, one could look at it and think, oh, well, that's easy. That would probably be Catholicism as practiced in Ireland. But it just readily became apparent for me right away that that's not the native expression of spirituality.
Now, I understand what you mean actually with your ancestors, for want of a better word. When I think of modern Ireland, then probably Catholic is the spirituality. But going back further than that, there is a really strong thread of, again, for want of a better word, pagan spirituality in Ireland, isn't there?
Absolutely. And that's sort of a big part that I honed in on in my latest work here at the Irish Pagan Book of Rites, is how really Europe as a whole, but certainly Ireland with its unique expressions of Christianity, it's really not so much Europe that converted to Christianity, in my view. Rather, it's Christianity that converted to Europe. Ireland got that quite a bit, maybe even more so than certain other areas. And it probably helps in a way that Ireland, except during the Cromwell era, under the Commonwealth and all that. But besides that, Ireland fairly, for the most part, had this uninterrupted stream where it was underneath the Catholic Church, which definitely had its not great side, put it lightly, but also in a way that preserves some of those traditions, because the oncoming or advent of Protestantism wanted to eschew so many of those extraneous things that it felt were, probably in a way rightly so, thought were pagan intrusions into an otherwise pure Protestant Christianity that they wanted to get at. And maybe if you're coming at it from a Christian point of view, they had a point. But in countries that remain Catholic, we have this amazing survival of so much pagan practice and folklore, and it just the thinnest of veneers of Christianity over it. And so I feel we can approach a lot of those rites, and all we got to do is just peel back some of those layers, and we have a shockingly intact paganism right beneath the surface.
Yeah, you do include some of the texts that you've drawn from in your book seem to relate to Christian prayers, but then I think perhaps even words like prayer make some pagans, oh no, but actually we do it, don't we? We do spells of prayers, or talking to the moon is a prayer, or there are a lot of crossovers. Definitely.
And I think, in my own practice, I'm very comfortable now with sort of reclaiming that language for ourselves. And I can't speak for everyone, and I totally understand and can only empathize with the experience of people who maybe are coming from a more repressive or confining background of Christianity or other monotheistic traditions in particular, that associated language is just it's a little too raw still. Like, okay, I get it, but I'm not going to do it myself. It's a tangent, but it's a little bit like the kneeling thing too, which is actually a little similar, where it's kind of like there's so many memes out there, and I, again, totally respect this, but especially in the heathen community, I'd say there's a lot like, we do not kneel before our gods, which is fine. You don't have to. You do not have to. But we do have it on record in some accounts that the ancestral pagans would occasionally, it seems, kneel before the gods when they were doing acts of worship. We do have that in the survival of the letters from Ibn Fatlan in his travels with the Kievan Rus. Was it the Kievan Rus or just the Rus? I'll just say Rus, just in case it's not quite 100% accurate. But who were, for all intents and purposes, heathens. They most likely would have been worshiping some form of Odin and Thor, etc. And we have an account that once they made landing at one area, that the men got off the ship and approached a series of representations of their gods, which were represented as poles in the ground, and that they fell on their knees in worship and made offerings to the poles. And in some ways, it really does make sense because the default stance of prayer in the Abrahamic faiths, especially Judaism, for example, is standing, is to stand and sometimes have a gesture of arms out, either standing or, in the case of Islam, full prostration. And usually just on once a year on Yom Kippur, maybe also on Rosh Hashanah. I'm not a rabbi, don't quote me. But Jews will also, during the Great Aleinu, they will also make a full prostration. Other than that, the default gesture is standing. Whereas it's actually in Europe that we find this tradition of bending the knee to show reverence. Or respect. Especially in the case of a king. Yep, exactly. Yeah. Respect to a king, to a royal, a noble, etc., etc. So yeah, curiously, the whole kneeling thing might actually be a rather uniquely, or not uniquely, but a peculiarly European gesture of reverence. While purely standing is, ironically enough, the more traditional Abrahamic form of worship. But again, since nowadays most of us would associate kneeling with kind of a Catholic form of worship, etc., those coming out of that background, totally get it if you never want to kneel again in your life. That is fine. And plus, that gets into the whole snake bit of, how do we go about the reconstruction of these forms of worship in the first place?
It has to be something, I think, that each individual feels comfortable with, doesn't it? It's got to work through your own pathway. So we've mentioned your book, subtly dropped it in a couple of times. So it is...
this?
It is the Irish Pagan Book of Rites. What inspired you to write it? And it is a fascinating book. I have read it, and I think it is definitely, you've drawn obviously on ancient Irish texts, but it's absolutely something that could be worked into modern day practices for anyone on the spiritual pathway. But what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, it was kind of something that came together over an extended period of time. It started off as my own writings of actual practice and what I was doing, both solitary and with a couple other individuals in the area who we would meet up for regular rites and stuff like that. I started writing things down, and because we just wanted to have a little bit more organization and kind of bring in a little bit more high church to our rituals and whatnot. And so, and then of course the language nerd in me really wanted to be able to communicate these prayers and these rites in the Irish language itself. And that's another topic unto itself. But, I find that sort of ancestral and linguistic connection is so enriching and so valuable. And so It was part spiritual exercise and part linguistic study, but just being able to take kind of what we were doing and different portions from various different surviving works that we do have and crafting these rites together in the Irish language. But at the same time, they don't like have to be done in Irish at all. I think they're completely effective. What matters is what's in the heart.
Yeah.
As I like to say to people, my definition of paganism is it's the default human religion. If you just go out there, exactly. You go out into the woods, that sense of connection that you feel, when you're underneath the night sky and feel that immensity and also that beauty of it all, that's paganism. It's the religion no one has to really teach you. And at the same time, it's, along with other basic fundamental things of kind of just human nature like that, like eating. We all got to eat. However, each culture has developed its own sort of cuisine and way of doing food that's very much based on, their environment and their own history, etc. So what is Irish paganism? It's basically like the Irish cuisine of how the Irish civilization has developed this way of reaching out and touching the divine, that numinous other that is so present in the water, in the wells, in the mountains, in the sky, in the sun. And so, so this book is just an attempt to give others a little bit of that guidance, that guide. It's a recipe book. If I dare keep going with that food metaphor until
any analogy that involves food is good with me.
Right? Miguel, I didn't have breakfast. I'm like, got just like sausages and eggs going through my head, right?
But I often recommend, if someone's looking into the culture of somewhere, that looking at the cuisine is a big part of it, because it reflects a lot of how the actual culture is as well. Yeah, absolutely. I think we should perhaps mention that there are a lot of fantastic texts for various things, which we'll cover in a minute in the book. They are in Irish, but you have thankfully put the English translation as well, because I must admit I struggled with some of the pronunciation.
Yes, and that is a caveat when it comes to the Irish language. It is not exactly written the way it sounds. I mean, and that comes with a giant asterisk. And the footnote is, it makes total sense once you learn kind of the method to its madness. So like once you learn all the rules of how Irish goes together, it's perfect. It's beautiful. It's way less random than English is actually.
And English is pretty random, let's be honest.
Oh, right? Super random. Oh my gosh. Thank the gods we were blessed to be able to just be raised with it as a mother tongue, because my absolute heart goes out to those who have had to learn it as a second or even third language. I have so much respect for you. Oh my gosh.
And that comes from someone who speaks several languages, as I understand.
Yes, I'm a proud language nerd. I'm obsessed with languages. No, they're so cool. Here I go with the metaphor again. I need to eat something. But it's kind of like with the cuisine, how getting to know a country's cuisine, etc., or a cultural cuisine kind of gives you such insight into the culture of the people themselves and whatnot. A language does the same. And, in the expressions of the language, in their proverbs, and even in some ways, I think, how the language just flows together. And the sort of tendencies of expression in it. And what I mean by that is, for example, Irish is a very flowery language. Like, you can express most things in just a couple words, but Irish is like, no. How about we use like 7 words, like, why just say, say it short. Whereas German, for example, is the total opposite. Sure. German is like, no, we must be as precise as possible.
Very efficient.
And it's so funny how that kind of ties into you know, it's a stereotype, I know,
Yeah.
but a little bit that stereotypes themselves. Whereas Germans do have kind of a tendency culturally towards that sort of efficiency. Say it short, to the point, no messing around. And then Irish does have a tendency towards the flowery, the more imaginative, the poetry, etc. So,
yeah.
But anyway, that was a tangent on its own. But yes, totally obsessed with language because of that. I'm one of those absolute weirdos who actually enjoys the grammar and all how like the languages fit together and whatnot. And
yeah, definitely weird.
Super weird. It will be the reason why, I need to be confined someday. But just feverishly writing conjugations. Back in high school, I started learning French and also German at the same time. They were both offered at my high school. Then when I went to college, I went to the University of St. Thomas down in Lowell, Minnesota. And one of my focuses was classical languages. So I picked up Latin, it's called Greek there. And so he came along all through. I had started Hebrew and went to fast Judaism. And then afterward, fantastic. Just a brain. What a mind. And also there was that love for the Irish language and Irish culture and history and lore. And I've just kind of slowly been cultivating that over time. And then it really intensified in, I'd say, the last 10 years as I really started to unite my spirituality, my practice, my more scholastic focus and linguistic focus all around Ireland and Irish culture and language.
Okay, so when we open up your book, there is a huge amount of information inside, all sorts of practices that I think anyone on the spiritual pathway can work into their own rituals, workings, whatever it is. I'd like to look at some of those. And one that took me particularly was the preparatory rites of purification, which is quite difficult to say fast. Can you just it's like a tongue twister. Can you perhaps just shine some light for us?
Kind of idea behind it. And I just want to get a caveat out of the way first, especially for, again, those who are coming from maybe a Christian background or something like that, where maybe their previous spiritual path or the environment they were raised in, which for a lot of us too is just hard to get away from because a lot of us are coming from culturally Christian countries and backgrounds as well, whether or not we had anything to do with a church growing up. So I just want to make it clear because someone might see that verbiage and kind of be like, well, purification, what do we need to be purified from? It's easy to think, oh, does this insinuate a sort of like sinfulness that we need to be cleansed from? Or is it a sort of confession of sins? And again, along with my sort of belief that paganism is simply the default human religion, that we have just a default human condition here. We are not these sinful, poor creatures who are just hanging by a thread over the maw of hell, and we need to, beg mercy in order to be saved from it.
Feels like it some days.
But no, so, sometimes we find ourselves there. Or, at the same time, though, it acknowledges that we are not the finished product yet. We are not perfect. I'm a great example of that. And so we are works in progress. And there are, things we've done that we're not happy about. There are situations we've been in. There are our own sort of mental difficulties and struggles that we might be going through. And so when we do a rite of purification, it's not about, trying to be wiped of some sort of existential guilt and sin that we've accumulated or anything like that. It's just acknowledging, like, it can be as simple as, yeah, it's been one rough hell of a week. And I just need this little rite that kind of lets me physically, through the use of water, which literally washes me clean, but also symbolically and spiritually just washes all that garbage off me that I might have accumulated through a rough week, through a wonky interaction with someone. Or maybe, you did do something that I'm not happy about or that I shouldn't have done and wasn't right. And I need something to not only rectify that outwardly, but also rectify that in my own soul. And so that's what these rites are about.
Now, well, you also mention 3 sacred realms, which sounds wonderful.
Well, yes.
Can you expand on that idea?
Absolutely. So these 3 sacred realms are sort of an imagery that's used in a lot of Celtic lore and is a recurrent theme in both the Irish mythos that survives, as well as Irish and broader Celtic poetry. These 3 realms are the realms of earth, sea, and sky. One way to look at it, even though it's not a one-for-one parallel, so I just want to make that clear to some of those more, down the Celtic path who will be like, that's not right. That they're kind of like the conception of the 4 elements that a lot of people in different neo-pagan paths might be a little bit more familiar with, of, fire, earth, water, and fire, and air. Oh my. We'll have another, please.
Yeah, that was a 10. We both failed.
So what are these exactly? How do these play in? Well, some people I've seen will do a sort of invocation of the 3 realms, and that's totally fine. I think in some ways that has its roots in the practice of calling quarters, which is very familiar to those in either a ceremonial magic expression or certainly in Wicca. If you want to do that, if that's meaningful to you, beautiful. Please, I want you to. In my experience, it's more of it's a worldview, and it comes back to us in many different metaphorical ways and also very just physical ways. It's the earth, it's the ground that's beneath our feet, and the earth is also the source of life, of new vegetation. It's both the beginning of life in that sense, it's a source of food, it's a source of sustenance, but it's also the place of the afterlife. It's a place in which we go when our bodies are done with this incarnation. It's the place of many of the gods, especially Irish lore is rather unique. This is a real thing that sometimes those who are transitioning out of a Christian context into a pagan worldview, this can be a struggle in a lot of ways, I think, is being able to see what's beneath us as sacred, because there's even just like that kind of flippant way of thinking of, the place down below, that's hell. If a soul is going beneath you, that's a bad thing. We don't want that. And you can see where that probably, I don't know that it does for sure, but may have its roots through the Christian conversion process itself. That, okay, your ancestors who went down there, you think that's good, that's actually hell, And so part of it is moving away from that and seeing, okay, the realm of earth as sacred. This is a place of life. It's also a place of rest and repose. It's literally a dwelling place of the divine.
Okay.
And then you have sea, which is the literal sea all around us. And it's easy to see that conception, how that would have grown out of a civilization on Ireland, where literally you're on an island surrounded by ocean.
I live on an island. I live on an island,
right? On
an island. So I'm familiar with the concept.
Oh my gosh. You got extra going on there. I love it. So very strong in the realm of sea here.
Yep.
And so not only literal water, but also the metaphor of water, the changing world around us, the different waves and patterns, and also its own source of life, but also a place of, bearing life, but also the dangers and the changing tides, and that is the realm of sea that surrounds us and is everywhere. And then, of course, finally above us is the realm of sky, also a dwelling place of the gods, also a place of nourishment, of sustenance, the sun, the starry bodies, etc.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful way of looking at it. But there are differences, aren't there? And I guess it's about wrapping your head around it. But it is a beautiful way of looking at it. Beautiful way of looking at it.
Just one final thought on that, because sometimes it's asked, okay, so I see a strong parallel there anyway with the four elements. So we have kind of of the three realms, we have earth. Obviously, we could put equals sign the element of earth. We have sea equals water. We have sky equals air. Well, where does fire play in with all this? And in the Celtic conception of things, fire is in many ways its own thing. It's so central, and it shares that in so many ways with our deeper Proto-Indo-European expression of religion, because we find this across, and really not even just Proto-Indo-European, this is an expression across human cultures, just that centrality of the fire, that not only provides warmth, it's this dangerous thing that is only semi-tamed at any given moment, that at any second could get out of control and wreak havoc. But also, without it, we are just in the darkness. And so it really has its own thing, and it comes back time and time again, especially as a source of inspiration, of poetry, of knowledge and wisdom, and in the great fires that would be lit during the 4 Celtic fire festivals, etc.
Now, I know how much you love words, and you have an acronym in your book, A.R.T.S. A-R-T-S.
Oh, yes.
Which is?
Yes. So the A.R.T.S. acronym that stands for adoration, reparation, thanksgiving, and supplication. Very verbose, very wordy, but it's a nice way of just packaging up the idea of, okay, why do we worship, or why do we honor the gods, the ancestors, the spirits of the land? What are the 4 aims we're going for there? And so the A.R.T.S. acronym is just a handy way of sort of looking at that, and we can even use that then in constructing our own rites. And that's something that I'd love for people to do who get their hands on the Irish Pagan Book of Rites, is to be able to use this, not just the rites in their form that is presented in the book, but take that and you can mold it to your own desires and where you're at in your relationship with the gods, with your ancestors, and with the spirits of the land around you. Use that, and you can kind of use this acronym to recognize what it is that you are desiring from your own spiritual life. So the first part of it, adoration, is that we can offer to the gods, to our ancestors, and to the spirits around us simply out of love for them. In a lot of ways, offering to these divine beings and the special beings who have gone before us, it's no different from giving a gift to the loved ones that you see physically around you on earth here. So in the same way, you might give someone a gift just because you love them so much, they're just close to you and you just want them to know, yeah, I've just been thinking about you and I want you to have this. That's an act of adoration. And it doesn't need to be a super lofty thing. It can just be, a beverage that's poured out onto the ground and say, thank you for the beauty of this place, to the spirits around here. Something like that. And then the next one, so we have A, then R, and that's reparation. And again, that's one that can kind of alert, red flag, alert some of us who might have come from a background where it's like, okay, reparation, what are we trying to repair here? Or, is there something, is it the sin thing again? And not necessarily so. Again, sort of with purification rituals, we might want to make an offering of reparation simply because we're not feeling right on the inside. Or, again, we are all works in progress. We're going to do things that we're not proud of or that didn't go right in our day-to-day life or something like that. And reparation is a way of giving to the gods, giving to our ancestors, and just kind of saying, I feel awful about what happened. I want to give this to the divine realm as one of my steps in trying to set things right. And that sort of rightness with the world and the universe is a concept that comes back again and again from even the most ancient lore that we have. This sense of and in a way, that's the purpose of sacrifice and of offering to the gods at its root, is setting things right. Reparation, another beautiful expression of it, I think, is reparation to the spirits of the land around you. And for a lot of us, no matter where you go nowadays, there is land that has been severely mistreated. Industrial use that was done unwisely, land, rivers that are polluted, forests that were, cut down without any sort of sense of replanting or care. And so there can be a beautiful expression of making offerings of reparation to the spirits of the land around us, or in those particular areas, giving to the numinous beings who dwell and are expressed through those natural features, and saying, I'm so sorry for what has happened here. There's only so much I can do, but here, let me at least give of this to start a step in the direction of making things right.
Yeah, little baby step.
Yeah, exactly. So the T is Thanksgiving, and that's pretty self-explanatory, and that's a very old form of offering to the divine, is simply out of thanks for something that's been done. And that really goes hand in hand with the final letter in the acronym, S, which is supplication. Fancy, unnecessarily verbose way of just saying when you want to ask for something. It's just an ask, Sometimes I've seen in some writings here and there's almost a feeling of that we shouldn't do that. I'm not saying everyone has that sort of approach to offering in that way, or maybe even not that it's necessarily popular, but just want to give voice to that some people are like, oh, well, if they're gods, if they're divine beings, they already know what we want. Why should we, make these offerings out of supplication? Well, that can get into a whole theological debacle about which I'll be happy to do, but
next time.
Next time. There we go. But it's okay to ask for that. And not only is it okay, I think for one, we need that on a certain level. It's just natural. And we see that, again, it's one of those pan-cultural things of humanity that we make offerings just simply out of asking. Look at the myriad surviving Roman altars all scattered throughout Europe that say, Marcus so-and-so will make an altar or make a libation to this god for X fulfilled. And so you make your offering, and once it's fulfilled, then you make the tea, your thanksgiving, afterwards, once it has been fulfilled. And that's a tradition going back millennia. So those are the aims of worship, the aims of offering in a pagan context.
Brilliant acronym. Brilliant.
Thank you. If it's handy, if it's useful, I love it.
Now, you mention offerings, but in the book you mention hallowing of offerings, which is a term that some people might not be familiar with. Enlighten us. I'm trying to find the biggest words I can.
That's all right. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. So I would say, so hallowing, in other words, it's just making something sacred. It's basically the same as just sanctifying. It's making sacred. And, that term itself comes from the Latin sacer facere, or sacer facere for the ecclesiastical pronunciation, a little more flowy. But in other words, just making holy. And that word sacer, for sanctify, in its original meaning, actually has more of that sense of separating. And we find this, since, of course, much to our own woe, we do not have much surviving for what the Celtic and Irish practice of religion looked like on a regular basis. And when it comes to the Irish rites themselves, we don't have those direct survivals. But we do from a lot of neighboring cultures, especially, for example, the Roman religion and related ones such as the Greeks, even a bit from some of the Slavic tribes here and there. And so we do know that it was important to set something aside as sacred, to sanctify it. And once it was, then that is for the gods or for the ancestors or for the spirits that you are offering to. After that, it's not okay for human use. And if for some reason something had to be desanctified, the celebrant would just simply touch the item, and that profaned it. It returned it back into the human realm.
Oh, okay. Simple.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's no big fuss with it, but it's just, we see this very ancient idea. It goes way back, and I would argue there's fairly good reason to think that perhaps the Celts also had an expression of that idea because they're drawing from that same kind of root well spiritual system as the other European cultures were, of setting something aside as sacred. In fact, even that survival in a lot of folklore of, places such as places of rock circles and the wraiths and whatnot, that you don't go there. You don't go near there. There's almost this survival in the folk memory of a place being sacred, so you don't touch it. You shouldn't go and just be there without purpose. And so I think that's another strong memory of that exists among the people. So long story short, I think it's a wonderful practice in rites just to deem something as being hallowed then. And it's, in a nutshell, just a way of separating it. It's like, okay, this glass of whiskey, this is no longer for me and my buddies on Friday night. This is now for the gods.
That's the sacrifice, isn't it? That's where the sacrifice part comes into offerings, isn't it?
Absolutely. And sacrifice it is.
But that's how it should be, isn't it? I think that's, we no longer, thankfully, sacrifice humans or animals. Right. But an offering should, in some form, be a sacrifice. Like
Definitely.
The best whiskey you can afford and that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Try and go as high on that shelf in the store as you can.
So in your own practice, are there any specific ritual items or objects that you use for your rites?
I do personally. And those are laid out in the book as well. It's another thing, though, I would make clear that, again, paganism, default human spirituality. So what do you need? Just yourself. That's the only thing you need. So everything else is just making it fancy. That said, I would say a great place to start, especially because this practice, and I would argue ancestral practice itself, is so based around the gifting cycle of offerings, is to have something like an offering bowl, which, not sure if it's visible here, but this is mine right here. And just a bowl for those libations where you can pour it in and it's now hallowed. It's now sanctified. Again, with the concept of sanctification, it's a special thing set aside only for your ritual use. Whatever goes into it, just on all levels of your mind, your subconscious and everything now knows, okay, this is for the gods, not profane use anymore. So I would start there, kind of building up from there, making the ritual a bit more lofty, because that can be a beautiful thing. Again, it can be simple, but just kind of like, for a wedding, sure, you can just go to the justice of the peace and get married. That's fine. Absolutely. And nothing wrong with that, actually. That's totally awesome. But you can also, if you're feeling it, fancy it up. You can put on special wardrobe. You can have someone who's in, special year, saying special prayers for it. The same thing is affected. We're still, here doing this wedding. The same thing will happen. However, we're elevating it. We're just kind of bringing a sort of higher atmosphere to it. And I get the feeling that the gods and the ancestors appreciate that.
Yeah.
Again, not knocking anyone who gets married by the justice. Just disclaimer there. Love you. But yeah, kind of the next thing would be maybe a special place for fire. Again, fire has that centrality in our tradition. And that's something that goes back to like the yajna sacrifice that's practiced in Hinduism, all the way over to Roman religion, to Greek religion. So many different expressions of faith. You see this in even certain Buddhist rituals. We see this in Shintoism. So if you have kind of a central place for fire, and again, making sure it's a place that's always sacred, set apart just for that. So I would recommend, if it's all you can do, that's fine. But, certain candlesticks or candle holders, and just have those always just used for rites. Again, it doesn't need to necessarily be a fire pit. If you have the property to do so, awesome. Please go for it. Invite me if you can. Those are the best.
I'll bring the marshmallows. Yep.
Beautiful. But if you can't get a fire pit, it is totally okay to, just kind of like have a little holder with a candle in it. And that is your place of a sacred fire. That is fine. It truly is fine. No worries there. And so we have a place for offering. We have a place for fire. And then since water often features in our rites and has its own sacrality, its own holiness in a sense to it, it can be good to have also a place to hold any sort of water that you've blessed. The term I use in the book is lustral water. And so just having a place for that, especially blessed water, can be very important. And then you're not, just pouring it out of a bottle or something like that. Just kind of, again, elevates your ritual, elevates it in your own mind and interpretation as well.
How would you do mention lustral water in the book. How do you create it? How does it become lustral water?
Sure. I think there's a lot of different approaches to that. In the book, I mentioned that first and foremost, the most sacred kind of water would be water that actually comes from a place that's already known for its sacredness, such as the holy wells that we find not only in Ireland, but all throughout Europe, in many places throughout the world, that are just places that already have this beautiful numinous energy to it, that just generations upon generations of people have connected with. And so that water, there's nothing more we can do to that. So that's already holy and sacred in itself. And at root, the concept and the metaphor of water is so beautiful because at its root, the entire water system of the earth is all connected itself in the water cycle, in the oceans and the rivers. So what I lay out in the book as a way of blessing the water and rendering it as lustral water is not so much us through some sort of power of our own rendering it sacred, but it's more about recognizing that just as, that same water that is all connected, but as it can go through, say you run that water through, some nasty pipe that's full of all kinds of, pollutants and garbage, and then it's going to come out the other end and you're not going to want to drink that. That's going to be full of parasites. It's got all kinds of crud in it. Ew, don't do it. Terrible. So we need to put that through a filter, and get that cleansed, maybe boil it, who knows what, and then it's suitable for drinking. Well, it's a similar concept here that I lay out in the book. The ritual that I provide is our way of spiritually filtering that water. Knowing that if I turn on the tap, it might look good. It's probably pretty good to drink. Maybe not the best if I have a good filter or anything, but I could make it do. But also that water has been through a lot. If we take a broader spiritual view of it, it might even have picked up certain influences depending on how you're viewing that interpretation of the water where it carries. It's a carrier of different energies. And so we want to use this rite to cleanse it, to kind of bring it back to a clean slate so that it can be used for purification, not only of ourselves, but of our sacred spaces, without any sort of energies attached to it that it might have picked up along the way.
Brilliant explanation. Yes, you are a wordsmith, for sure.
Well, thanks. I've had way too much time on my hands.
You've put it to good use, obviously.
Thank you.
Sticking with the lustral water, I was interested to see that you suggest the celebrant washes their hands in the lustral water before beginning anything. Why? Can you explain the reason behind that?
Sure. Basically, that gesture has its origin in, again, some of those surviving parallel traditions that we have of European pagan practice. We see the celebrants in the Roman religion would wash their hands before offering the sacrifice and doing any sort of offerings to the gods as well. The quick answer is it's a parallel of other European religions that survive. Additionally, on top of that, it's our way of getting into the moment, getting into the zone. It's a realization that we are entering into really the most sacred part, the most separated part of that ritual gesture. So we've called upon the gods to be with us, to bear witness with us. We've called upon our ancestors, please surround us. We've perhaps already made an offering to the spirits of the land, asking that there be peace between us and that they assist us in this. And so now we're ready for the offering itself. And so it's just a kind of a doubling up at that point to wash our hands and say, okay, now I am ready for this most sacred part of my action. Because with these hands, I am now going to give this gift to you, gods, to my ancestors. And so I just want to make sure it's coming from a place of innocence, a place of purity of intention. And that's symbolized by the washing of our hands.
No, it's not something I've ever done, but it's certainly something I'm adding now.
Oh, very cool. Oh, beautiful.
Because it makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, just very quickly, you include the 4 fire festivals. Now, a lot of the pagan world will be familiar with the 8 Sabbats of the Wheel of the Year, which is obviously a more modern idea. You've picked the 4 fire festivals. Can you very quickly guide us through why just the 4 fire festivals?
Sure. So those 4 festivals are the ones that we find most anciently attested to in Irish sources, and more broadly speaking, in other Celtic sources as well. We don't find as much about regular celebrations of those more astronomical festivals of the equinoxes and solstices, which is actually rather curious because we find the burial mounds and some of the stone rings and whatnot, the stone circles, they tend to be lined up to those astronomical events, rather than the 4 fire festivals. So there is a curiosity there, maybe a paradox, maybe just a lack of written evidence for whatever reason. However, what we do know, what we can go off of, is that there is this strong attestation of the 4 fire festivals of Imbolc, Beltane, of Lunasa, of Samhain. And we see that continued right through to the present day. We have, the bonfires still being lit on many, many hills in Ireland, right up, through to the beginning of the 20th century. It's ironic that it was only, in the last 100+ years or so that started dying out a bit. And thank the gods we're seeing revivals. But there was just such a strong association there. So we can know for sure that those are the main festivals for us, given the ancestral tradition.
No, your book was fascinating, and we've only literally skimmed the surface of it. I would recommend it to anyone. No, I mean, I don't follow an Irish pathway, but there are bits of it that I've already taken out to work into my own pathway. And it would work for anyone. It's an absolutely fascinating book. Finish up with my very last question, which is just a general. What was the last book that you read that you enjoyed, hopefully? Not for research, perhaps, but just for entertainment.
It was probably, there's this little collection of short stories that was put together by A.R.T.S. And they are, in the edition I have at least, they're presented in a bilingual format, much like the Irish Pagan Book of Rites is, with the English on one side and the Irish, the Gaeilge, on the other. And it's this collection of just super delightful, just short stories that I believe, might have this wrong, he either collected or kind of put together himself, but inspired from the folktales that he heard around the Irish-speaking parts of Ireland. And they're just full of their own fascinating, just otherworldliness and insight into, that culture that in so many ways was so beautifully intact on the west coast of Ireland in the Gaeltacht, the Irish speaking areas and whatnot. And he just captures it so well. So it's an absolute delight. It's a quick read. You could finish it on a lazy Sunday. And yeah, beautiful. I think it's just called Short Stories by A.R.T.S.
I knew it would have languages in it.
I can't help it. I can't stop. It's a problem. I told you, Rachel.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, John. And as I say, do people go out and buy the book? It's absolutely fascinating. And I think everyone can get something from it. And a huge amount of research must have gone into it. Brilliant book. Yeah, Pagan Book of Rites. Yep. Thank you so much for joining us, John.
Yes, thank you so much, Rachel. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you to all of our listeners and viewers. Do join us again next time on Triple P.
You have been listening to the Pagan Portal Podcast, a Moonbooks Publishing production. For more information, please visit our website.